I want to say something clearly right from the beginning. Self-trust isn't a feeling. Now, I know that's not what most people want to hear because there's a version of this whole conversation that goes something like this. Just believe in yourself, feel the confidence, trust your gut, and then everything follows. And look, I understand the appeal of that. It's tidy and it's got good fonts on Instagram. But it's not how self-trust actually works. Self-trust is built the same way any real trust is built, through follow-through, through watching yourself do what you said you were going to do, through noticing that even when you were afraid or unsure or tired or that old pattern was really loud, you still made one honest move. That is what changes your identity, not a declaration, not a mindset shift, not the moment you finally feel 100% ready. You need a track record. And today we're going to talk about how to build one. Welcome to How to Lose the Weight, the podcast for women ready to stop waiting for someday and live life now. I'm your host, Holly Toscanini, and I'm here to help you break free from perfectionism, self-doubt, and the someday mindset. Together, we'll dive into real conversations about self-trust, empowerment, and living authentically. If you're ready to reconnect with your intuition and step into your power, you're in the right place. Let's lose the weight and start living fully right now. Welcome back to How to Lose the Weight. I'm Holly Toscanini, and this is episode 122, the final episode of the W.A.I.T Weight Framework series. Now, we've been on quite a journey, 12 weeks, the full arc. We started in the witness phase, making those invisible patterns visible. We noticed our inner counsel, the research loop, the someday cycle, fear with a planner, the just fine trap, and we named what was keeping women waiting. And then we moved into the attune phase where we're learning to listen and hear our own intuition again. We're learning to tell signals from spirals and questioning the belief that worth has to be earned through our output. And then we moved to the initiate phase. We learned about the 80% start, the courage confidence sequence, the micro pivot, which is really small, honest moves that interrupt that conditional living loop instead of waiting for the perfect moment to make a big dramatic change. And now we're here, the trust phase. Last week, we talked about the grief of years spent waiting and the reframe that changes what those years can mean. We reframed you're behind to you're overdue. This week, it's about what happens next. Not someday, not when you feel fully confident, not when you have perfectly forgiven yourself for the waiting years. Right now, with the tool I call evidence over emotion. Let's wrap it up. I want to explain why feelings aren't enough. And I am going to be a little cautious with this statement because I'm certainly not here to tell you that feelings don't matter. They definitely do. Your feelings give you real information. They tell you when something matters, when something hurts, when something feels off, or when you're afraid or grieving or ready for something in your life to take a different turn, to really make a change. But feelings aren't always reliable evidence of what is actually true. You can feel unqualified and still be very capable. You can feel guilty and still be allowed to say no. You can feel behind and still have time, and you can feel afraid and still be moving in the right direction. This is why self-trust can't depend on feeling confident all the time, because feelings rise and fall, and they're influenced by sleep and stress and hormones and family dynamics and one glance in the mirror at exactly the wrong time. You know what I mean? If your self-trust depends on how you feel that day, it will always feel unstable. One day you'll think, I can do this. And the next you'll think, who did I think I was? And here's where it gets worse. Your inner critic knows how to use all that emotional shift. It's going to take the hard day and call it evidence. It's going to say, see, you're not ready. You always do this. You can't trust yourself. And if you say, I feel like I'm becoming more confident, your inner critic says, really? Because you were spiraling last Tuesday. If you say, I feel ready, it says, are you sure? Because the last time you said that, you backed out at the last minute. That Inner critic is an excellent historian. It can pull up every single time you changed your mind, avoided the conversation, said yes when you meant no, or started something and didn't finish it. The problem is not that those things happened. They've happened to all of us. The problem is that your inner critic has been the only one keeping this sort of record of events, this sort of archive. And it's not keeping a complete record either. It's keeping a very curated record, curated for the case against you. Evidence over emotion is how you start keeping a different record. Not better thoughts, not a nicer script, actual proof, a current track record that the inner critic cannot erase because you wrote it down and it actually happened. So what does evidence over emotion actually mean? Let's start with what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean emotions are bad or that you should override how you're feeling. What it means is you stop letting a passing feeling erase the proof of who you really are, who you're capable of really becoming. It means when fear says you can't do this, you answer with something concrete like, oh yeah, I sent the email. I said no. I made the appointment. I had the conversation. I moved before I was ready. Those are facts. Small facts maybe, but they are facts. And they matter because your old identity, the one that says, I always overthink, I never follow through, I can't trust myself, didn't come from nowhere. At some point, you watched yourself do those things. You watched yourself stay quiet, and you watched yourself back away. And over time, those repeated moments became a story that you carried around about who you are. Evidence over emotion is how you begin collecting a different story to tell, not by pretending that old one never happened, and not by shaming yourself for it either, by adding new proof, one piece of evidence at a time. Now, I do want to be a little careful here because if you're a high-achieving woman, you might be tempted to turn this into yet another performance, another place to measure yourself, or another metric you're going to fall behind on. So please don't do that. Trust isn't built by perfection. It's built by consistency and a little iteration. The consistency means you start keeping small promises to yourself. And the iteration means when you don't keep one, you come back, you make a few tweaks or adjustments without turning it into a character assassination. Because many women don't actually have a follow-through problem. They have a sort of rebound problem. They miss one step and immediately make it mean, see, I knew I couldn't follow through. And this is why I don't start. This is why I can't change. But missing one step is certainly not the same as returning to your old way of life. A little wobble isn't a total collapse, and a hard day is certainly not evidence that nothing in your life is changing. Sometimes the most important proof in this evidence log is not I did it perfectly, because sometimes it's I returned to my center faster than I used to, and that's evidence too. All right, so I just mentioned the evidence log. This is how we keep track of what actually counts. I want to make this really practical. The tool I'm going to introduce for this episode is what I like to call your evidence log. And I want to keep it genuinely simple because the last thing this work needs is another project you can fall behind on and then use it against yourself. Am I right? The evidence log is just a place where we're going to record or keep track of all of the proof that we're building. The proof, it can be small. In fact, it should be small because if you only record the big wins, you really miss the identity change that's happening in those little ordinary moments. So here's the format. It's very simple. You're going to write one sentence once a day, right? I said it was simple. The sentence is this: today I kept my word to myself by, and then fill in the blank. That's the foundation. Now, if you want to get fancy and add a couple more, add these two. The pattern I interrupted was, fill in the blank, and what I learned was, fill in the blank. So it might look like, today I kept my word to myself by pausing before I answered. The pattern I interrupted was the automatic yes, and what I learned was that guilt can be present and I can still give myself time. Or, today I kept my word to myself by working on an idea for 20 minutes. The pattern I interrupted was waiting for full, complete clarity before I began. And what I learned was that the action I took gave me more information than thinking about taking action did. Or easier, today I kept my word to myself by making that appointment. That's enough. Now, and this is important, I want to be clear about what counts as evidence. Because if you're only recording the moments when everything went perfectly and everybody responded beautifully, you're missing out on what actually matters in this work. It counts if you told the truth, even if it was imperfect. It counts if you paused before you said yes. It certainly counts if you noticed the old pattern before it completely took over. And it counts if you came back after avoiding something. It counts if you rebounded from that wobble. And it counts especially if you said, I'm not going to use this moment as proof that I can't change. That last one is the one I really want you to remember, because one of the biggest shifts in this work is learning not to turn every human moment into evidence against yourself. You're allowed to have a hard day without making it your entire identity. You're certainly allowed to feel afraid without handing fear the keys. And you're allowed to miss a step without deciding you have to go back and start at the beginning. Keeping this evidence log helps you see the entire record, not just the feeling of the moment, and not just the old story, but the whole thing. And the more evidence you gather, the harder it becomes to keep believing your old identity still exists. So I want to give you a quick example of what this looks like with something real. So let's say there's a boundary you've been avoiding putting in place, maybe with a family member or a colleague or anybody who keeps asking more of you than you've really got to give. You know something needs to change. And maybe your micro pivot is simple. The next time the request comes in from this person, you pause before answering. So it just means you don't answer right away. Maybe you answer or write back if it's in an email, let me check and get back to you. Now, I know that may not seem like much, but if your old pattern was to automatically say yes, that pause is your evidence. It proves you can create space before abandoning yourself. It proves that discomfort isn't the same as danger. And when your inner critic later says you always cave, you have proof that this is no longer completely true. Not because you feel differently, but because you acted differently. That's the distinction I'm making. Or what if, let's take a desire you've been putting off, maybe something you've been putting on the back burner, a creative project, a trip, whatever it might be. And every single time it comes up, you kind of explain it away. It's just not practical. It's not the right time. Everybody else needs you right now. But you give it one small moment of your time this week to bring it into reality. 30 minutes. You write one paragraph. You do one search. You have one conversation with somebody you trust about what it is that you really want. And then you write that down. I gave my desire, whatever it is, 30 minutes of real attention instead of just dismissing it. Small, yeah, but your inner critic has been using years of delay as evidence that you're not serious. Now you're offering yourself a new perspective. So here's the phrase I want you to take away from today. Feelings cannot argue with proof. Your fear might still be pretty loud. Your doubt may still show up with all its opinions, and your inner critic may still try to remind you of who you used to be. But when it does, you'll have an answer, not a feeling, a fact, something you actually did. You wrote it down, you've got proof. I sent the email. I said no. I made the first move. I bounced back after a wobble. Okay, so the old story has a lot of evidence behind it, I know. You've been collecting it for years and years without even really realizing it. Every time you stayed quiet, every time you backed away, every time you said yes when you meant no, that became part of the record or the archive your inner critic is running on. So now you start keeping a different archive or record. It's not going to erase the old one, and it's not to prove that you've become somebody new, but to give your present self something solid to stand on. And that is important. So your practice for the next 7 days, make one entry in your evidence log every day. Remember, this is simple. This is one sentence. Today, I kept my word to myself by fill in the blank. That's it. And at the end of the week, read it back, not to grade yourself, but as proof that something is changing, proof that the old story is no longer the only story. Because that's the identity shift this whole 12-week series has been building toward. Not from stalling to being fearless, not from waiting to become some perfect version of a woman who always knows what she wants and acts on it immediately without ever second guessing herself. Because that woman does not exist. And honestly, if she did, she sounds pretty exhausting. The shift I'm talking about is one from someone who waits, who stalls, to a woman who keeps her word to herself. One honest promise at a time. Now, if you've been listening to this series and thinking to yourself, I want to do this work in a real way with structure and support and someone who can walk me through it step by step, that's exactly what the unwaiting method is. In September, so just at the end of the summer, in a couple of months, I'm opening the Founding Round, which is an 8-week group coaching program for midlife women who are done living in the waiting room. We're going to move through the full W.A.I.T wait framework together. You'll identify your waiting pattern, name what it's been costing you, reconnect with your own signal or intuition, and choose the micro pivots that fit your actual life, and then build evidence that makes self-trust real. This is not about turning your life upside down, I promise you. It's about becoming the woman who stops letting herself doubt set her limits and starts keeping her word to herself, one honest move at a time. The waitlist is open now, and Founding Round or Founding Member spots are all limited, and the waitlist members are going to hear about it first. That link is going to be in the show notes and in the description below this video. You can also head to my website, hollytoscanini.com, and check it out. Thank you for being here for this series. If you missed a couple of episodes, head to the show notes and start with episode 111. Now, if you've listened from the beginning, I hope you can feel the entire arc of my message now. You witnessed the wait, you learned to attune to your intuition, you practiced initiating action before you felt fully ready, and now you know how to build self-trust through evidence. This, my friend, is how you lose the wait, not by becoming fearless, not by having your whole plan mapped out in advance, and not by waiting until the past no longer hurts, by choosing right now, today, to build a new track record. One honest promise at a time. Until next week, bye for now. Thank you for tuning in to How to Lose the Weight. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe so you never miss a conversation. And if you found value in this episode, I'd love it if you could leave a review. It really helps the show reach more women like you who are ready to step into their power. For more insights and inspiration, follow me on Instagram at Holly Toscanini or visit hollytoscanini.com. Until next time, remember, stop waiting and start living.